So chapter 14 right around the corner of Two Blue Vortex, I can't help but try and guess what we might see in this chapter. Because if I'm being entirely real, the events of chapter 13 caught me way off guard. I mean, I was so off base on what I believed was going to happen in chapter 13, I had to genuinely sit down and reconsider if I knew anything about this manga in the first place. Here I thought Boruto was going to scoop up Himawari and Sarada, whisk them off to one of Orochimaru's caves where Orochimaru, Kashin, Koji, and Kakashi were going to teach the three of them all the jutsus they would ever possibly need to know. But no. He got arrested. And therefore, well, it's technically not an impossibility. The things that I hypothesized will come to be. They definitely didn't happen in chapter 13. Now, it's not all bad. I did predict some of the things that happened, but still, I'm not used to being, well, I guess, this wrong. And that's with my new attitude and fervor for trying to figure out just what's going on in this manga. I figured there's no greater time to try and predict what's going to happen in chapter 14 than, well, right before it leaks, so we can see if I get out of this funk or if I'm going over 2. And honestly, as I imagine it, I can't imagine chapter 14 of Boruto going in any other way than the way I believe it's going to. See, well, obviously, Boruto stealing Sarada and Himawari and whisking them off to Orochimaru's caves where they get trained by 3 different very powerful sensei was always kind of a long shot. So maybe I need to stop shooting for the stars and be happy with landing on the moon. And the moon, as I see it, ironically has nothing to do with Mitsuki, but instead, Ino. Yes, Ino, the 3rd most important woman from the Konoha 13, who now in Boruto has seemingly taken the biggest step forward in importance out of any of the members of the Konoha 13, Naruto possibly not included. Like, he's always been important, but then in Boruto he was the Hokage, which feels like a pretty big step. Like, going from not Hokage to Hokage is a pretty big step. See, because Ino, who was well known for being the worst part of the Inoshikacho trio for the entirety of Naruto and Naruto Shippuden, has not only stepped into the role of a very accomplished jonin in Konoha, but also has become the leader of not only the sensory unit, but also the interrogation and torture unit. And this all ties back to her mastery over the Yamanaka clan techniques. See, whether it's her skill as a censor or her ability to read people's memories simply by coming into contact with them, Ino's skills have become invaluable, and thus she's gained a position of considerable power in the Boruto universe. And the strength of that position is about to make her instrumental in chapter 14. But instrumental in what capacity, you ask? Well, I believe Ino will not only be instrumental in the releasing of Boruto from his captivity, but also the spreading of the news of omnipotence. Yeah, that's right, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna see an Ino come back before GTA 6. Then again, it's hard to call it a comeback if she never was really around in the first place. Because today, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking Ino will free Boruto. But before we get to talking about the legitimate #1 MILF in all of Boruto, I will not be told I'm wrong. Please, guys, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Or if you want to hear me talk about anime and manga that aren't Naruto and Boruto, go ahead and follow my other YouTube channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime and manga. Or if you want to see me try to bring real-life challenges to the anime world, go ahead and follow the brand new page that I created with Stephen Heat, Chris Barnett, and Danny Mata called Anime IRL. Or if you just want to hear me talk anime and manga, go ahead and follow my anime podcast, Talks Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime and manga this week. So a lot of you have probably said, Nick, in what feasible way could Ino ever play into the greater politics of the Boruto universe? And honestly, considering Ino's past accomplishments, that's not the craziest question of all time. During the entirety of the events of Naruto and Naruto Shippuden, Ino accomplished a grand total of, she was in the least compelling fight in all of Naruto versus Sakura, she helped in the battle against the Edo Tensei Asuma, and obviously picked up the slack of the communication for the Shinobi alliances after the death of her father, Inoji. But outside of that, she hasn't really done much to progress the plot. So why, now, in a story not focused around her generation, would that change? Well, it kind of has nothing to do with Ino and everything to do with Boruto, but that's not entirely fair. So let's quickly recap what's going on in Konoha right now. Boruto is knocked unconscious by a tailed beast ball shot fired at him by Jura. Because of this, not only did Hidari's Soulthorn get away, but Konohamaru and Kawaki took advantage of Boruto being out cold, identifying this as their only possible chance to ever apprehend him, as he is so much more massively powerful than they are, and slapped a pair of jutsu-suppressing handcuffs on Boruto, made by none other than Amado. Now, this convenient invention pretty much all but guarantees that Boruto isn't going to be breaking out by himself anytime soon. See, well, obviously, yes, you can make the argument that Boruto's still probably stronger than 99% of the people in the village without his jutsu. I seriously doubt the handcuffs just suppress jutsu. I'm assuming the handcuffs work in a similar capacity to that of Sea Prism Stone in the One Piece universe, wherein jutsus are blocked most likely through the stoppage knowledge of the flow of chakra. Except that's kind of a sketchy topic when you consider the fact that chakra is the legitimate life force of everybody in the Naruto universe, and therefore stopping chakra flow or even diminishing chakra flow could kill the person you're putting those handcuffs on. But still, even with his hands handcuffed behind his back, Boruto could still probably land chakra-assisted kicks that would blow down walls of jail buildings, as could most ninjas. So something's got to be going on with those handcuffs that goes beyond just suppressing jutsu. I actually think the Hozuki Castle arc did a really good job of showing how to suppress the power of ninjas, aka the Blood Prison, as the usage of Fire Release Heavenly Prison stopped all of the ninjas from even attempting to use ninjutsu and also kept them all on the prison grounds. As if they tried to use their abilities or escape the prison, the technique would just reduce them to ash. But whatever, none of that matters. All that's genuinely important is the fact that Boruto is currently in captivity, and that Kawaki is either the world's greatest actor, or that the karma marking that he has on his body that has the DNA and chakra of Akebi is slowly but surely downloading onto his body and remaking him human. See, the reason I bring this up is because Kawaki seems to be sipping the Gatorade a little bit. See, well, obviously Boruto and Kawaki haven't talked about omnipotence since it was fired. Kawaki does seem to hold a legitimate amount of vitriol and hate towards Boruto in his heart, and he seems to buy into the same ideology as everybody that Boruto murdered Naruto. And while we've seen Kawaki check in on Naruto and Hinata, haven't talked about Hinata in a while, this doesn't mean that omnipotence isn't slowly but surely having an effect on him. When it ties into the fact that Kawaki has lost every single fight he has entered into in Two Blue Vortex, regardless of who they were against, and it's getting harder and harder to believe that he's a full Otsutsuki, especially a full Otsutsuki made from the powers of Ishiki. I mean, my god, he got knocked out by Mitsuki. And the reason that it's important that Kawaki may or may not be becoming affected by omnipotence is because it may or may not affect what he vouches for in terms of Boruto's treatment. But as it currently stands, it seems fairly obvious that Kawaki wants Boruto caught. Period. As to what Kawaki wants done to Boruto after he's caught, well, I guess we'll figure that out in chapter 14. But we do know what the village elders want for Boruto, as Hamura and Koharu are still alive and still governing for some reason. And even in the face of Boruto helping the battle against Code in the early chapters of Two Blue Vortex, even when Shikamaru reported this heroism to the elders, they still said that he needed to be executed for killing Naruto. And thus, it is highly likely, if not guaranteed, that the elders will now push for Boruto's execution now that he is in captivity. Now, this is obviously something that Shikamaru, as the Hokage, would not want, because after all, he's privy to the information of omnipotence and understands that Kawaki is the actual bad guy and Boruto is fighting for Konoha. And thus, Shikamaru will more likely than not try to stay off in execution. But the answer is how? And that, gentlemen, and mostly other gentlemen, is where we get to Ino. See, while Ino has mostly been seen in her role as the head of the Cypher Corps, maintaining the barrier around Konoha and tracking chakra signatures, that's not her only job, as she's also the head of the interrogation and torture department. And yeah, that's what they call it. I once again ask for the millionth time, are Konoha the baddies? Yeah, usually when it comes down to interrogations or torture in Konoha, we think about Ibiki, the Scar guy, whose jutsus revolve around him torturing people to death to get information out of them. The man so incredibly feared that Kisame cut down 2 members of his own Cypher Pole because he understood that if they were taken, he'd get the information out of them. However, possibly because Konoha got exposed or is just getting more humanitarian, the person now usually in charge of interrogations is none other than Ino. And that's because when it comes down to it, she's a lot better at it than Ibiki is. See, Ibiki has to force somebody to tell him what they know. Ino doesn't have to force anybody to do anything. It's so long as the person is alive and Ino's mental fortitude is stronger than the person that she's probing, she is able to pop into somebody's head and just watch their memories like a movie. And thus, if I'm Shikamaru and I'm trying to hypothetically stop our hero from the shadows' execution, I'm saying, well, okay, hold on. Before we kill him, let's read his memories. And the craziest bit is that it doesn't even actually have to be Shikamaru who would recommend this. See, Ino reading Boruto's memories makes sense from the perspective of literally everybody in the village outside of Kawaki. See, those who are affected by omnipotence don't really know what Boruto's been up to the last couple of years. They don't understand why he showed up when Code showed up in the village and fought against him. They don't understand what's going on with the Shinju. They don't understand why Boruto killed Naruto, and so many other things. In fact, the vast majority of people affected by omnipotence believed that Boruto was working with Code until he showed up in Konoha and beat Code within an inch of his life. And a lot of them still believe in some capacity or another that Boruto and Code are connected. And thus, as Code is still an incredibly pressing threat to Konoha, it would make sense that Konoha would try to glean as much information about Code as they could out of Boruto through the usage of Ino. And then there's obviously the benefit of postponing the execution, if even for a little bit, for Shikamaru. However, there is one person who would be massively opposed to Boruto's memories being read, and that would be Kawaki. And considering the fact that Shikamaru has been walking on glass ever since he found out about omnipotence, this is the first real situation where he as the Hokage could go, no, we need the information, we're probing him. Because he had no real reason to figure out anything about omnipotence, and he didn't want to put Kawaki onto his trail. However, Kawaki is now on his trail, but Shikamaru wasn't going to be the only person pushing to get Boruto's memories extracted. And thus Kawaki's either going to have to do something to prevent Boruto's memories from being read, and something drastic, mind you, or Boruto's memories are just going to be read, and that's going to be really bad for Kawaki. Maybe. See, here's the thing about Ino being the person who's going to read Boruto's memories. Ino has been privy to every conversation that Boruto and Shikamaru have had. The only way that Shikamaru was able to communicate with Boruto in a way that Ada wouldn't be able to listen to was by using Ino. And thus all of the conversations that Boruto and Shikamaru have had while Boruto was in Konoha, Ino was listened to. She is essentially the cell phone receiver between the two of them so they can talk in their minds. And because of this, all of the information that Boruto was given to Shikamaru about the Shinju, omnipotence, and so much more, Ino now knows. And while Ino may not be as intelligent as Shikamaru, if Shikamaru was able to listen to Amado, figuring out that his memories were messed with, and use that as the foundational basis for him figuring out omnipotence was fired, Ino listening to Shikamaru talking to Boruto about how their memories were manipulated and what was going wrong and how Boruto and Kawaki's positions were swapped should have been enough to switch her to Team Boruto. However, Kawaki is not suspicious of Ino. He's only suspicious of Shikamaru, and therefore Kawaki probably wouldn't think that Ino would have an ulterior motive for trying to read Boruto's memories. On top of this, Kawaki probably has somewhat of a vested interest in figuring out what Boruto's been up to for the last 3 years. Because at the end of part 1 of Boruto, Ada tells Boruto that she won't watch him with his Senrigan, regardless of what Kawaki asks for, and she has lived up to this promise. Now, ever since Boruto decided to return to Konoha, she's been spying on him with his Senrigan and reporting that information to Kawaki, but effectively, up until the point that Boruto did return to Konoha, Kawaki has no idea what he's been doing, and therefore Kawaki may actually want Boruto's memories read, but probably not, because there's really no way that can go well for him. See, because while Konoha would learn things about the Shinju, Kashinkoji, Code, Rasengan, Uzuhiko, and so much more, if Ino was able to pour all the way back to the night that Boruto was supposed to have killed Naruto, then she would see omnipotence being fired and Boruto and Kawaki's positions being flipped. And if she wasn't already Team Boruto, she would very quickly become Team Boruto. However, it's not like Kawaki fully understands how omnipotence works, and therefore, as he won't be the person reading the memories, there is some room for trickery here for both Shikamaru and Ino. See, their current plan is to placate Kawaki long enough for Boruto to gain an advantageous position to take him out. If Ino, after reading Boruto's memories, stood up and went, oh, he didn't kill Naruto, Kawaki's the bad guy, he would freak out. And therefore, if I'm Shikamaru, I'm understanding that Ino's going to be sent in to read Boruto's memories, and I'm prepping her. I'm saying get as much information about the Shinju, Kashinkoji, and everything that's inside of Boruto's head as you can, but do not, for the life of you, reveal omnipotence. See, because while yes, she should be able to see the firing of omnipotence, and that should push her firmly over to the side of Team Boruto, if she comes out and starts talking about it immediately, things are going to get ugly. But then you're probably asking yourself, but okay, then it's just Ino joins Team Boruto? Is that what the whole video was about? And you're like, no, and yes. Kind of. See, yes, obviously Ino being pushed over the edge to Team Boruto isn't a massive swing in the power scheme of the Boruto universe. However, see, because not only is Ino in charge of the sensory department and the interrogation department, she's also married to the head of the Anbu, Sai. And thus, if she saw with her own jutsu that Boruto and Kawaki's places had been flipped, and now Konoha was in danger because Kawaki lived there, she would have a fair amount of motivation to go to her husband Sai and say, listen, I got some news for you. And while it's a solid possibility that omnipotence would have too great a hold on Sai for this to break him out of it, we've seen before that a loved one telling you about the powers of omnipotence is enough to break you out of it, like with Sarada and Sasuke. And yes, I'm aware that happened at the beginning of omnipotence when omnipotence was at its weakest. However, Sai will most likely be in the room whenever Ino was reading Boruto's thoughts. And while I don't necessarily remember or know if she's able to pass the memories that she's gleaned from others on to others, I don't think that would be the craziest development in her powers over the course of the last 20-ish years. See, because while it's never necessarily been shown that the Psycho Mind transmission ability is able to take memories out of somebody's head and transfer them into somebody else's to pass along what the Yamanaka found, Ino herself is able to lock onto a chakra signature on a battlefield and transfer the information of that chakra signature over to her allies. And therefore, there's a fair amount of lore established that Ino should be able to possibly pass these memories along to other people. And thus, if hypothetically she was able to do that, she'd be able to pass them to key figures in Konoha like Sai. And the beauty of all of this is that Ino is also able to communicate with people non-verbally. And thus she would be able to communicate with people like Sai and Shikamaru and other key figures in Konoha without Kawaki or Ada ever being privy to it. And thus Ino diving into the memories of Boruto is obviously important for swinging her over to Team Boruto, but could also possibly be the most important thing for breaking a lot of very important people in Konoha out of omnipotence. And she has pretty significant motivation to do this. So obviously at first she was apprehensive about connecting Shikamaru and Boruto, and said if their conversation got traitorous, she'd have to report it. She didn't report it, and she continued to keep Boruto and Shikamaru connected because she believed in what was being communicated. And thus she very clearly has a vested and borderline traitorous interest in making sure that Boruto's name is cleared. And thus Ino could be a central linchpin in Boruto's releasal from captivity. See, because while it seems fairly obvious that Kashin Koji is going to try to make his way to Konoha, because as it currently stands, he has no way to communicate with Boruto, as the toad that Boruto had on him was smushed into smoke, Kashin Koji, when he crosses Konoha's barrier, will register as Jiraiya. And while that's happened before, and he was able to get away with it because his chakra signature is the exact same as Jiraiya, and therefore didn't register as an outsider, in this era of now way heightened tensions, where now both Code and Boruto have broken into the village in the last 48 hours, the barrier division is probably at its most diligent ever. And therefore the chakra signature of somebody like Jiraiya passing through the barrier would seem odd to the people working there. And in situations like this where Ino could come in massively handy, as she is the center of the barrier division, could make Kashin Koji's chakra signature appearing disappear. On top of this, the Psycho Mind transmission technique can take a really long time. See, the Psycho Mind transmission technique allows for a Yamanaka, after they place their hand on your forehead, to dive into your subconsciousness. And even if you have forgotten the memories or purposely blocked them out, the Yamanaka is able to grab them. However, some memories are protected by things like Genjutsu Protect, a technique that places Genjutsu-based mental blocks over vitally important information in somebody's mind, making it substantially more difficult to drag out. Now, this means that some memories are harder to access than others. And while I've only ever seen the Psycho Mind transmission used on a few days worth of memories, if Ino is trying to gather 3 full years of memories, this would probably feasibly take a long time. And thus there's a standard possibility that if Ino is brought in to use Psycho Mind transmission, that she's gonna be left with Boruto at some point or another. And it's in this moment that Ino could use this alone time to spring Boruto. And she could go even further by helping the likes of Kashin Koji, Sarada, and Sumire get Boruto out of the village, as she is the head of the sensory division, could stop sensors from sensing Boruto, sending them to the wrong areas or simply just shutting them down. However, ideally she would be low-key in the way that she supported Boruto, because the combination of Ino and Shikamaru in Konoha on Team Boruto is a lethal combination for Kawaki. Those are undoubtedly the 2 most important people in Konoha to be Team Boruto outside of the elders, but honestly, who's listening to them at this point? And when you ties into the fact that Inojin was recently critically injured in the battle against Jura, there is technically a reason for Ino and Team 10 to be in the same room for a fair amount of time. And thus there is also a fair amount of possibility that Ino at some point or another has a sit down with Shikadai and Chocho, and maybe even Himawari, as all of them could go to visit Inojin, who is currently in the hospital, or heading there at least. And during this sit down, Shikadai and Chocho and Himawari could be wondering about why Boruto helped all of them, at which point Ino could key them in. And thus, while Ino switching to the side of Team Boruto may not seem like all that big a deal, the way that the circumstances are currently set up inside of Konoha make it a very important shift. And thus, I do genuinely believe that Ino is about to play a massive role in the plot of Part 2, and that without her, Boruto stands really no chance of getting out. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Now, prior to Chapter 14's release, do you believe that Ino's gonna play a big role in the next upcoming chapters? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, it's time for lunch.